an ideology critique of ideology critique, indulgence in scratching a phantom itch, because I want to use some Marxist notions. I'm developing a Marxism that's focuses on an empowerment, on the dignity of persons, and how, roughly put, that we don't want entitlement. That's, we don't have to earn our keep, but we want an entitlement to work. We want that if we want to work, we are able to earn our keep. So it's not a complete socialism, but at least it's still an ideology critique. And by distinguishing these two things, I hope that it will be clear what it is to merely scratch an itch that you want to stay, because that makes you feel good, the pleasure you derive from bad mouthing certain things. So the outline is like this. So I will start with ideology, what the Marxist notion is, especially in how it sustains capitalism and alienation, why capitalism is wrong, and having distinguished what Marxist identified as a capitalistic wrong, I would point out what's right about capitalism and what is to stay, and point out a materialism that doesn't permit scholars to stay at a idealistic level. Especially, we want an ideology critique that assists us achieving morality politically to effect real social change by playing by the rules. And in the end, I will show what it is, that it is an ideology critique that's wrong. Okay, ideology, I think, is a collective presupposition. Of course, false consciousness is a very important thing, and how it is false in contrast to being real. I think we can think about how that consciousness think and feel and behave with regard to work. There's a reality of work and its fantasy. The reality, we can look at what it is when we engaged in agriculture. So ignoring how the morality of initial acquisition is, how someone acquired a certain land, and let's say someone owned that piece of land, and the farmer, through his hard work, his labor, has certain agricultural produce. So he owns morally the product. It's the work that went in and how he owns those output. It's that simple, that's work, and that's how it really is. And the fantasy through industrialization is that, so there are some capitalists, maybe they don't, the capital that they have, it's not what they deserve. I don't know why, maybe through inheritance, and even maybe they would abuse what they have, the privileges. Yeah, they have the factory, they own the means of production, and the workers, in order to earn their keep, they need to engage in certain employment contract with them, and they have a share through the contractual agreement. But the problem is whether those work is what the product through the labor of the workers to the capitalist deserve. Are those good? And that's the problem. That's what Karl Marx focused on. And to think about ideology in terms of popular belief with regard to capitalism. So the workforce, everyone is brought up to think that, yeah, the wage, it depends on the market mechanism, the free market, supply, demand. So if a certain skill set is in high demand, then people will pay more money for that. The wage will be higher. And through wages or monthly income, salary, we have certain income. If we have higher income, we have higher purchase power. So it's very simple. We work harder, get a better job with better pay, then we can do more. Maybe even if we plan a vacation for leisure, with more money, we can go to more places. And on the other hand, beside leisure, to go back to livelihood, biological sustenance, food and shelter. And the problem is with what entitlement is. Yeah, we're not entitled, maybe ignoring universal unconditional basic income, that we do have to earn our keep, like the old times when we have to farm and even hunt or gather food, right? But at least the difference is that we're not always in a position to work. We need a job. We need means of production for manual labor, at least, right? So in real life, presently, the economic pressure economy obligates us to get a job in order to empower ourselves to have the power to purchase food, rent a flat, and shelter. So that's the popular belief that we accept without negotiation. But is that a social conditioning? Yeah, education. If we want to increase our social mobility, to climb up the social ladder, we need better qualification to get a degree, undergraduate degree, university degree, tertiary education, instead of going into the job market too soon. If we do that later, if we can, we'll get a better job with better pay. And given that conditioning, especially that we have a somewhat a vested interest in the system, when we see someone that doesn't have the money, is starving, maybe we're biased to think, oh, he didn't work hard. He didn't play by the rule. So that's how ideology works, I think, as a collective presupposition that we, given certain prior belief, that we are to believe in order to play a certain game, to engage in employment. Given those prior beliefs, we will think certain things differently. And the problem is whether those beliefs are true and whether the corresponding feeling and thinking and doing are appropriate. So, of course, there's a class, ruling class, those that are in power, typically, at least those with the capital. They maintain the social hierarchy through those presupposing the hierarchy and wanting to climb up the ladder. And there's the problem with membership and identity, right? Because you have to say a certain thing, do a certain do things in a certain way in order to earn a group membership, to belong to some group and even to climb up a certain class. And those prior commitment would bias how we see the world, ideology. But so what's wrong about ideology? Well, there's some form of ideology that's alienating, sustaining a certain capitalism that alienates the workers from the fruit of their labor. So the reward are deprived. What they deserve, they don't get. So I want to focus on what's moral ownership, what it is to own something morally, what it is for something to morally belong to someone. So labor transforms material into good, right? So even with farming a certain land, agriculture, we turn material, well, seed, earth, land, or maybe rainfall, those natural resources. And what do those natural resources belong to? Initial acquisition, now ignore the problem. So we turn it into good through labor. And the work done constitute the product. Well, it goes into, it's part of the product, right? Even if materially it's just that, but the work is contribute to the eventual outcome, the good, the product. So at least in a position in which we have the proper property right over the input, the material, the land, at least, maybe. And the process, how we own ourselves, when we work, the process, it's over and through and using the things that we own. Then, presumably, we have the property right over the output, the product, and that's our possession. That's what we achieved through our work. So they morally belong to us. But then morality differs from legality, right? Because we could have the moral ownership without a legal ownership. So one way to look at legality in contrast to morality is there are situations in which our moral rights are not legally recognized. So let's say someone owns a flat legally and has a name on the lease, and he gave it as a gift to someone else. So moral ownership transfer. But does that constitute a legal transaction? Well, even a legal transfer of ownership property right? Well, if the recipient, through legal means, properly changed the name of the lease. So that's a very simple way in which someone could have morally the property right without the legal right. And if it so happens that the recipient has to enforce his or her moral right, it will run into trouble without having renew the name. And the judiciary, it legally enforces the moral right. The person with the legal right has the legal power assisted by the judiciary to enforce his moral right instead of, because when we think back to the day when we talk about land ownership, that's natural resources, initial acquisition by occupying the land. Natural resources, the rainfall, the sunshine, I'm here and I got it for free. Well, if someone were to invade you, that's another issue, but society, the judiciary protect your moral right. And how is it that the land morally belongs to you? That's a very complicated question, but at least the judiciary, given that the law recognizes your moral right, it will enforce your moral right legally instead of having to resort to self-defense. So that's one way I would understand the difference between morality and legality. So with regard to personal achievement, instead of, let's say, land ownership and in the end means of production ownership, if we were to reward on competence, yeah, with a better competence, we contribute better through our labor. If you can do things better, then of course, given the same means of production, given roughly the same empowerment, you would output more. You would add more value to the company, profile, portfolio, and it would be great if the reward correspond to the value added. So how much good you produced, that's how much reward you get. So it's on competence and given certain empowerment, the performance, right? For example, especially with us in academia, creativity. When we think about things, of course, besides coming up with a novel idea, we also come up with, we study history, intellectual history. But let's say we talk about novel idea. Well, the mental process where we own our brain, we own our mind, we own ourselves. So with better creativity, we produce novel idea better. Hopefully they are knowledge, they constitute knowledge, at least useful ideas. And those new things are our intellectual property. And that's how I understand what we have the property right over our idea, how we use it, and how the moral right we have and how it goes into legal rights, patent. That's how I would understand the morality and the legality of personal achievement and how it relates to the big picture in the capitalistic society, in capitalism, in on a free market, right? So, but then the question about alienation will be at the background, but I want to focus on the immaterialism. That's, again, something from Karl Marx, and how is it that consciousness transformation, because we talk about false consciousness, right? We hope that we will go into an authentic one, a real one, and how is it that it's possible? So us in academia, scholars, intellectuals, we discuss theories, or maybe some of us is professional scholars, professional philosophers, literary critics, and historians, social theorists. We submit to journals, and through peer review process, we might do better, but it's only in theory or roughly idealistically, right? So, or maybe we could engage in debate and seminar, discuss theory. On the other hand, there are those that are not, well, they're intellectuals, maybe from the university or not, that engage in social movement. We organize and mobilize, but it's, even through protest, we want to raise awareness so people know more things. And of course, there are also ideology critique that's on public platform, TV, a newspaper, blogs, and Facebook. And these update people with knowledge, ideas, or fact, evidence when they see the videos about the situation of work in some places. But this stays at the level of awareness raising, and whether that kind of idealistic sublimation is sufficient. But we can look at a kind of materialism that's not a class struggle through violence. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that's totally legal and politically, I think, correct, following the rules. A capitalistic competition that's capitalism, a free market conception of capitalism, supply, demand. So people need that, demand that, but it's in great supply, so it doesn't, the market price, the market value is, well, roughly, the wage you would receive will be less. So, you know, on a free market, because the selling price is thus determined, so labor, given the same labor and a similar skill set, if there are more people with your skill set, then you know, because your skill set is in higher supply, then the same work, the same labor would not be rewarded with as much money as otherwise. So that's the reality of the capitalistic free market, the labor force, the job market. But then we know our self-worth, right? Because there's something called a personal market value, how much one is worth on the market, how much one would pay for your time and effort, or even to employ you as an employee. But there's something, the real competence, and whether it's in demand. So, because I think in terms of being empowered to work, it's like, well, scholars, I think we enjoy reading, writing, researching, and even teaching, but not every one of us has the chance to get paid for that. And that's, as we all know, that's almost like a dream for all, well, let's say, philosophy PhD. So I think these are very important issues here. So human labor, well, Marxist notion of exploitation, I think I could understand that using the distinction between legal right and moral right. So given your real contribution, you morally deserve how much, but whether legally and through the contractual relation, especially given the free market mechanism, someone could have paid much less money, low wage for whatever someone is really contributing. So yeah, there are people, social enterprises, they, well, usually fair trade is between nations, but I think we could understand fair trade in the following way. So the monetary reward is what you deserve, what your work deserve. It's not because of your local, regional workforce supply that you earn less. Yeah, I could have paid less. I could have paid someone else. But well, what you did deserves that kind of money. then I pay that. But of course, that kind of social enterprises, they might face a problem of survival, because those that would not engage in this kind of fair trade, they will probably make more profit, and the social enterprises might not survive in a free market competition. So lastly, critique, ideology critique as an individual evaluation of the collective presupposition. We do engage in ideology critique, and especially in terms of how the capitalist mechanism, roughly speaking, is unjust, right? But I think before doing that, we should know that there are economic authority, that their authority is substantiated with morality. Roughly, it's justified. So there are those with the capital, the wealth. It's moral. They, of course, Karl Marx talks about workers and their labor, but capitalists also work. Well, maybe back in those times when there were feudalism and monarchy and even dynasty, right? There are people with inheritance, but that's another issue. That's actually well, they're in the minority. There are those that, yeah, they didn't work that much, but they have a lot of money. But that's they're there. But in the end, if we focus on the many capitalists that worked hard and earned their wealth, so why are they wrong, right? They play by the rule. They are just another workers. It's just that they're very successful. So I think the issue of moral ownership of assets and even means of production and money in our society, it's, well, given a certain legal recognition of a currency, then it's the money that people would trade with. With more money, you have a higher purchase power and even more liberty, the kind of liberty that's, again, like more money, you are more at the liberty to travel to many different places, even for leisure, right? So that's the reality. And how is it that it's unfair? I don't think that it's always the case that those with more liberty are being unfairly rewarded. And here it is something that I would highlight. Of course, we want equality. It's a must that we maintain equality, but equality of what? And one thing I think is that given the fair competition, we want equality of opportunity. So everyone had a chance, but the outcome, well, it depends on your effort. Yeah, it also depends on luck, especially with your inborn talents. But of course, it's hope that you explore what you're good at. So in a fair competition and you lost, well, there's bound to be a winner. If you're envious at the winner, those with more money, sometimes the envy is fitting, but there are times when it is a malicious envy, and it's bad because you don't. You're being envious at someone that's fairly, justly rewarded. So, on the other hand, in cases in which the envy is appropriate, maybe there are favoritism. Let's say, I think it's a very important issue, even a case study of how awareness is raised, because the structural, distributive injustice through a systematic gender bias in the reward system, right? Women's less cents on a man's dollar. That's a very much documented situation with very concrete statistics. So a man working hard might not know what's happening in other places with people of another gender. So having raised awareness, presumably you would want to help. At least you would not engage in exploitation, right? Well, the problem is whether the men's class, if it's a class, will sustain certain privilege through certain way of employment and for example, whether to accept someone into the at the board of the company. So these things are things we should be worried. And on the one hand, it seems to be on one's own conscience, whether having one's awareness raised, having that change, update in knowledge, what one does with that, but playing by the rule and changing the system politically, achieving morality politically. I think that's something very important that does real things. So engaging in ideology critique that aims at doing something with real transformation, in contrast to a consumption of politics that's, well, given a pretended victimhood, well, there's bound to be someone that lose out, but whether one is a victim of some structural injustice or whether honestly someone lost because one didn't do too well, or yeah, it could depend on luck as well. So having clarified whether one's victimhood is real, and there are times at which some could be like in a identity politics, it's a consumption, as in a ideology critique of that kind of politics consumption, in a way that, yeah, those people, they're bad people, they're oppressive, and join you with and shout slogans with you. But we don't try to understand our situation. How is it that I could do better and the others could do better? And if I got it right, it might manifest in this enfranchising the deserving class. Yeah, if I got it right, that there are those that do deserve the capital, the assets, the wealth they have. So there's a difference between hoping those getting less and hoping yourself getting more, being empowered through changing the social system. So if we work in solidarity through mutual respect, including what seems to be the oppressive class, understanding whether they are indeed immoral, and empowerment that through social change, through awareness raising, through policy making, so one would have done better, improved one's own situation. That's much more conducive to the betterment of society, instead of venting one's frustration for vainglory, I think. And if I got it right, that ideology critique that's metaphorically only scratch the itch, they might even want that itch to stay. And the problem is, they might in the end condition that kind of ideology critique that doesn't improve and stays at the level of, discussion of venting, and that, I think, condition the passivity of self-identified victims. And that's very bad, actually, I think. So in summary, I've talked about ideology and how it is a collective presupposition, and how Marx identifies that as what sustains the hegemony of the ruling class, or at least the capitalists, right? So, but then I highlight what's bad in ideology, leaving the possibility that there are ideology that is not exactly bad, because ideology biases certain decision, and whether there are times when some biases, some nudges are right, it's for posterior discussion. And then materialism, again, something from Karl Marx, about not only staying at the level of verbal critique, but engaging in some real changes. But I don't go to the kind of class struggle, especially not with violence. And in the end, having said all that, I want to point towards some kind of ideology critique that's wrong. And so that constitutes my ideology critique of ideology critique. So thank you very much.